We're here today with former Arkansas Governor and 2024 Republican presidential candidate Asa Hutchinson. Governor Hutchinson, thanks for joining us. We'd be remiss if we didn't start with what happened in Perry, Iowa earlier today, and I know you tweeted about it. Multiple people were shot at a high school, a sixth grader was killed, and the suspect is dead. And I just want to start kind of open-ended. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's with great sadness. Anytime a parent drops a child off to school, you expect safety. And so this is traumatic for the families, and the first thing you've got to do, of course, is bring in the counselors to make sure that they have the support that they need. But I also think of it as a professional in the sense of what can we do to stop this and better protect children, or as a policymaker. And I actually led a national study on school safety after the incident in Newtown, Connecticut. Mm-hmm. And so we did a comprehensive study with federal law enforcement, with security experts, and with educators. And so series of recommendations. So I'm fairly deep into this issue, and so anxious to learn what we can do better. There's always lessons to learn, and so that's my second thought, but we have to wait till we get the facts out, and then we will learn from there.
Of course, something that always comes up with this is if there's anything more that could be done as it relates to guns. Do you think that there's anything that can be done legislatively with restrictions or anything like that to maybe keep this from happening in the future?
Well, there should be a series of questions. You know, what do we learn about the gun that was used, access to it, what type of gun that was used, but secondly, what do we learn about mental health and the steps that should be taken to prevent this, and thirdly, you learn about the adequacy of the school security itself. So all of those have to be reviewed, and each one of them are important. And it's too early for me to know about the firearm that was used. I know that after Uvalde shooting, we had a gap in our system in which violent juvenile records were not made known whenever that perpetrator went to secure a firearm. Senator Cornine and Senator Murphy, I believe it was, from Connecticut, worked together to close that gap. So that's the kind of thing you learn and what I look at. You know, so we'll wait and see what lessons there are there. Mm-hmm.
And obviously you can't say about any one particular shooting, but why do you think we see so many more of these in America than in other places?
You know, that's something Americans should all think about. And, you know, as to what is it about our culture, what are we missing? I don't know that it's always been the case in America. And now you've seen, most recently, was it Germany that had the shooting there at a university, I believe it was. So I don't know how unique America is, but it appears that we have a problem with violence. And I think you have to approach it, one, from the mental health standpoint, what more can we do? And I think that is something we're not doing adequate on. Secondly, you know, what is it, we got to hold people accountable who commit acts of violence. And there's two possibilities anytime you have a mass shooting. One is you got a mental health issue, and the second one is somebody wants to kill people. And you've got to address both sides of those. I can't answer what's unique about America. You know, I made the point that Israel, whenever we saw the Hamas terrorists go into the settlements, break down the door, the family hides in the safe house. They blow out the door of the safe house, and then the family is there. If I'm there in that family, I want a gun. And it's interesting that Israel is starting to reevaluate, actually loosen up their issuance of licenses. So every country has a unique culture, and we just have to work with ours.
So you're in the midst of another swing through the state. You've been through our area before. What have you kind of learned from your time in Iowa so far with your campaign staffs?
Well, we're going to 30 cities in my return to normal tour, and that's intentional. And what I've learned is that a lot of the similarities between Arkansas and Iowa in terms of ag-based economy, in terms of small communities, in terms of the importance of the manufacturing base, in terms of the importance of faith and community, very similar to Arkansas. And so I love Iowa in that way. The economy is the number one issue, and it's actually evolved a little bit over time whenever you first started. And I've been here this next Monday at the legislative breakfast will be my 1-year anniversary of coming to Iowa in this campaign. And so early on, there was a lot of questions about Ukraine. There was that was sort of a dominant issue that you were asked about. That has reduced and the economy has elevated. And the intensity of the economic concerns has increased. And they express in different ways, whether it's affordable housing, whether it is worry about the job, or whether it's the cost of gasoline, but primarily it's the cost of goods. And so the economy is what I hear is the number one issue, and that's in my wheelhouse, and I like to be able to address that.
Now, folks might not be as familiar with you as some of the other candidates running. Why are you running in this cycle if you were to distill it down to people?
Because America is a nation at risk, and I have the breadth of experience in each of our challenges to address them, and that's unique. If you look at the challenges of border security, which has been the second leading issue Iowans express, second to the economy, I'm the only candidate for president that has actually had hands-on experience in securing our border. I'm the only candidate. If you look at the fentanyl challenges and opioid abuse, I'm the only candidate that's actually led law enforcement agencies in addressing the issues of opioid. Combine that with my national security experience after 9/11, which is very similar to what we face today with the threats from terrorist groups that not only target Israel, but they're going to target anybody who supports Israel, which is the United States of America. And that's not a short-term threat, it's a longer-term concern that we have. I've actually had to deal with those security issues. And I've had to work internationally to strengthen our security matrix with other countries. I set up the first visa security office in Saudi Arabia. I was there personally setting that up. And so I'm running because I look at the nation that we have and the risk, and I have the experience and skill sets to not just bring us together, but to lead us through these traumatic times.
You mentioned. You like to just interject. You've been critical of former President Trump at times. How much did his decision to seek the nomination again impact your decision to enter into the race?
It was a significant factor, and so yes, that's the second part of it. I disagree with President Biden's policies, but I also don't want to turn the party and our country over to former President Trump.
Yeah.
So that was a motivating factor. In fact, I was on a lot of the national media interviews, and I said, we have to have an alternative Donald Trump. And you say that enough, pretty soon you point your finger at yourself.
Yeah. So how do you think you rate compared to other the non-Trump candidates as far as being a clear alternative to him?
Well, first of all, I was early on clear and consistent in my message about we need to move away from Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And you contrast that with everyone else out the gate was embracing, not speaking clearly on that, and as the campaign has progressed, they have changed their message somewhat. But I was clear from the beginning. Also, I am the only candidate campaigning in Iowa that has said that it is wrong to promise a pardon to Donald Trump. during his campaign.
At least based on the polls right now in our state and others, former President Trump's enjoying a huge lead. What are people missing or not understanding about a potential second Trump presidency?
Well, you got to have some confidence in the voters that they're going to figure this out, and it's very understandable. I supported Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020, but I saw what happened on January 6th. I saw what happened with his revenge motivation and recognized early on this is wrong for America. And it's my hope that the voters figure that out. But the fact is, Donald Trump has told them the big lie, and voters have bought into it.
Do you have any regrets now about supporting President Trump either of those times?
You know, that's second-guessing history, and first of all, I supported Mike Huckabee, I supported Marco Rubio, and then I wound up with Donald Trump. So it wasn't my first choice necessarily, but I did see him as the alternative to Hillary Clinton, and it was that choice. So that was what most, many people thought.
Are you seeing though now when you campaign that people are thinking, yeah, we've got to rethink this a bit before just jumping on the Trump bandwagon and supporting him?
They are, you know, and it varies. But like today, I mean, first of all, it's very amazing to me that we're 2 weeks away and there is a significant number of undecided voters out there that are still seriously mulling it over. And then, you know, I talk to people that, yeah, they lean toward Trump and they look at it, he did better with the economy than where we are now. They believe he's being picked on, targeted. All of those are factors. But I talk to them and they understand fundamentally that there's a risk with Donald Trump.
But you had mentioned earlier that you just said the picked on, that you're the only candidate that had said you would not pardon him. But I think a lot of voters, it appears, for what they say, they feel that he is being unfairly targeted by the Justice Department and the Biden administration or like the New York Attorney General, and that seems to have rallied a lot of support toward him. So
Yeah.
how do you counter that? I mean, when you feel like that this is someone in our party they're out to get, and we should stick together and support him. I mean, so, yeah.
Well, that's correct what you're saying. That's the reality of it. You know, as a candidate, we're all frustrated that, the dynamics of the Trump legal proceedings dominate everything. And so you just have to navigate through it. The way I handle it is forget all the criminal cases. And I agree the New York case should not have been brought. I question even the Georgia case just because that should have been deferred to the federal prosecution. But the bottom line I articulate is, look at the facts, forget the criminal cases, but do you want to have a president that mishandles national security secrets and uses them for entertainment? Do you want to have a president that is morally responsible for January 6th and you see hundreds go to prison, but he is not held accountable for it if we have an equal system of justice in our country? So I address everything based upon my view of the law and the importance of it, and I think I'm talking about the rule of law more than any other candidate that's out there and respect for it. And I really talk to Republican audiences, do not let this undermine our respect for our criminal justice system, and we cannot and be the same as the other side. We can't, I mean, Trump's made it clear he wants to weaponize the Justice Department against his enemies. I mean, surely we can see the inconsistencies of all of this.
What happened though in our country that people go along with? I mean, I find it just absurd that some of these things he's saying, they just jump on the bandwagon and say, yeah, we believe that too. What happened in our country that people don't try to figure out things for themselves and decide what is right and what isn't right?
Well, let's look at Iowa. The second from the last poll had Trump at 43%, I believe it was. Then the Des Moines Register poll had him up over 50%. Don't know which one's right, but regardless, hopefully you got 50% or more that say we need to move a different direction. And so you've got to look at the breadth of the base, and that sure, some are grieved and are in line with Donald Trump, and others are saying, I'm not sure this is right. And there is a significant number of Republicans still, based upon the polls, that say, I will not support Donald Trump if he's convicted of a felon. And that's a line of demarcation even for Republicans. And that's why it's important to look at this over the long term of this campaign, that I don't know that the base will feel the same 6 months from now as they do right now.
Something I
Go ahead.
wanted to try and clarify, maybe go on to some other topics if we could. Back in October when you were in New Hampshire and another candidate has gotten in trouble for something like this, you said, let's let New Hampshire vote first. And I was hoping if you could clarify what you meant by that.
I said what now?
Let's let New Hampshire vote first?
Oh, well that doesn't sound exactly right, but I've always said, I support New Hampshire's first in the nation primary.
Okay.
And as I support Iowa consistently being first of the nation caucus. Mm-hmm. And I've also just always said, I don't want the national news media to pressure candidates in or out or to determine how we're going to narrow the field. That's why I've always defended to voters, whether New Hampshire or Iowa, that's what's going to determine how the field is narrowed.
Something that's very Iowa specific and is an issue that hasn't divided neatly along party lines here is the possible use of eminent domain for a private infrastructure project, specifically a carbon capture pipeline. And I'm kind of wondering, do you think that's an appropriate use of eminent domain?
I do not. Mm-hmm. I was chairman of the Southern States Energy Board. We had carbon capture pilot programs, and
Yeah,
it was. I was just that.
Sorry.
And so I support carbon capture and that support for the ethanol biofuels industry in Iowa. But whenever it comes to condemnation, these pipelines can be established based upon voluntary transactions versus eminent domain. And I'm a lawyer, so I look at a condemnation case, and the United States Supreme Court has said that to use the state's power of condemnation, there has to be a public purpose. And as you articulated, this is for a private party versus what I would consider a public purpose. So one, it shouldn't be used, and secondly, I think it would be defensible if somebody said, we're going to challenge the condemnation.
Another Iowa issue I wanted to ask you about. This past year, the state of Iowa passed a law scrutinizing the kinds of books available for kids to read in schools. And the Sioux City School District was one of a couple public school districts in the states that's now been sued in a federal lawsuit. Do you think that government should be making those sorts of decisions about literature, or what should and shouldn't be accessible to students?
Well, somebody's got to make a decision as to what goes in the library. Mm-hmm. And obviously there's some things shouldn't be in the library if it's particularly for youth and young children. So somebody's got to make those decisions. That's what we have school boards for. That's what we have library boards for, and that's who should be making the decisions.
Yeah. Do you think the onus for this too should fall more on the parents than maybe even worrying about state governments or municipalities getting involved?
Sure, the ultimate responsibility is parents, but a parent can drop a child off to a library. I mean, every parent's done that and think that's a great thing that we're doing for our children. But we want to make sure that they cannot access books that they should not have ability to access, and so the controls are always in there. I mean, they should be, and so parents are the first line of defense, but obviously you still have to protect what's in the library. Now, again, I want government at the local level, I want school boards and parents who are engaged through the school boards and through the library boards to have the voice as what's the library. I also think it's important that we teach truth. And I'm speaking more, I mean, you've got some issues that are the sexually explicit type of reading material that you want to guard children against. But whenever it comes to our history and the history of civil rights in our country, I advocate for truth being taught. And in Little Rock, Arkansas, we had a governor, Faubus, that blocked 9 school children with the National Guard from going into Little Rock Central High School. And we have monuments to those Little Rock 9, and we need to teach that history. And sure, that's going to make some people feel bad. But it's history and it's truth. We've got to teach it.
One other legal matter in Iowa. In July, Governor Kim Reynolds signed a bill into law that bans abortions once cardiac activity can be detected. That's been challenged by a couple of different groups, including Planned Parenthood of the Heartland. Do you think that 6 weeks is too strict of a restriction or not strict enough, or where do you think that line should be?
The states should determine those lines.
So you think it should be states and not a federal?
I do. Now, to be totally straightforward, I believe that the states is what we fought for a long time, to reverse Roe versus Wade. The states make the decision. Secondly, as a practical matter, the states are going to continue to do it, because if we can't elect a speaker in Congress, we're certainly not going to resolve this issue. Now, I'm pro-life, and if there was a pro-life bill that had reasonable restrictions and exceptions in there, I've said I would sign it. But I don't see that happening, and that's why I see this as a state issue. Now, I think the most important part of that debate is the exceptions. And the exceptions being the life of the mother and rape and incest. And I think with those exceptions, you can have reasonable restrictions.
A question I had about your time is, Governor, at one point you vetoed a bill that would ban gender-affirming care for transgender youth, and you said the measure was a product of the cultural war. Can you kind of expand on what you meant by that?
Well, we were the first one to consider this, and so it was straight out of the gate, and a lot of states have had experiences with it since us. The law that I vetoed was subsequently found unconstitutional by the courts, and is still unconstitutional today. Now, the reason I vetoed it is that it just went too far. It didn't have a grandfather clause in there. It was immediate cutoff of any care, and it prohibited even referrals for care. And that, to me, goes too far, so I vetoed it. Now, I wanted to make it clear that I don't believe minors should undergo permanent changes in their gender as minors. And that's not something they should consent to, and that's not something parents should allow. And so I would sign a bill today, and even as president, if it prohibited permanent changes in gender for minors. But the bill that I talked about went too far and interfered with routine medical health care decisions, giving the guidance, giving the counseling that's needed.
Based on all the available data, there's only about maybe 1 or 2% of folks in the U.S. who are transgender or identify that way. But it seems like that issue comes up a lot more in political discussions than you would think based on the population. I'm wondering why you think that is.
Well, I think it's because in some ways it's been pushed as this is a civil rights issue that's important for minorities, even though it's 2%. So it's been pushed. Secondly, it's become a little bit faddish. And I think those are the reasons it's predominant. And then of course, the conservative side looks at this and pushes back, and so it makes it an issue. I think over time it settles down, but I think that's the reason for it. My approach is, again, as president, I want the federal government to stay out of this. I want our values to be determined by our communities, by our school boards, by our houses of worship that impact our culture. I don't want mandates coming from Washington, D.C. that tilts the scales in our culture. And that's what we've seen from the Biden administration with our ESG requirements. They say an investment group can consider ESG as a relevant investment consideration. That, to me, the federal government pushes that direction. So I want the federal government to stay out from left or right. Let's let it be resolved locally.
Can I ask about Social Security? Mm-hmm. Where do you stand with that, and what needs to be done to fix that?
I will address it just like Ronald Reagan did. He set up a commission to look at the future of Social Security and Medicare, and Alan Greenspan led it, made recommendations. It had credibility. Congress adopted it and preserved those programs. We're not going to resolve it in a political campaign. I will set that commission up day one, and we want it to have bipartisan credibility. In terms of, and every solution should be on the table as they consider it, but I would say that this arbitrary extension of the retirement deadline needs to be looked at with more scrutiny. If you're, in my line of work, which is white collar, you can work for an extended period of time. But if you're in construction, if you're doing back-breaking work or working in a factory, your body wears out. And that has to be a part of the consideration as you look at the retirement age.
What do you think about removing a lot of Democratic lawmakers would like to see the cap on the FICA tax on earnings removed? What do you think? Should that be something considered?
Well, right now we cap it. I do think that should be on the table, and if the recommendation comes back that we need to raise that limit, then and help keep the program solvent, that's one solution that's there. So yes, I think that's should be on the table.
But should that if you do that, do you accompany larger benefits for those who are then consequently paying more into Social Security as a result of removing the cap? So that.
Of course, that's true now.
It would make it worse, though.
That's true. That's true. So all I can say is that should be on the table, and let's see what recommendations come out. You got to build a consensus on these.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got to have revenue to make those programs solid. One other way, well, this is not necessarily what they will address, but we have to expand the worker foundation in America. One unique idea I have, there's two. One, right now we penalize Social Security recipients ages 62 to 66. If they want to take Social Security and work, the government penalizes them. I will remove that penalty. And that will increase the base of workers and the payments in. Secondly, I want to have a state-based visa program, a state-based partnership with our governors, so that, like right now, the federal government can partner with employers. We have employer-based visas. Well, I want to have a state-based visa program so that if Iowa says we need ag workers, or if Iowa says we need biotech workers, they can partner with the federal government and handle that visa program. And that helps bring in legal workers to our country to meet needs based upon a partnership with states. I'm the only one talking about that. And to me, we'll put some security requirements into the state, with the states on this, but they can't mess it up any more than the federal government has.
How do you plan to bring the country together? Because that's what we're dealing with now, is this very big divide between our parties. And everything can be accomplished if they only get together and start talking. But they're not talking. They're just talking at each other or about each other. How do you fix that?
Leadership is what's needed in our country. We've always had divide in our nation, but we're in a unique time that we don't have leaders that try to bridge that divide. During the Vietnam War, Nixon famously left the White House before dawn and went out to the Lincoln Memorial where the protesters were and met with them, trying to figure out what's in their mind. We have to have that outreach today. So it's about leadership. but I also have to illustrate it as to how I work. So we had the George Floyd protest across America. Many of them turned violent. Little Rock was no exception. I watched as our Capitol was threatened, buildings were being burned, people being hurt, and our mayor was not doing everything that should be done. I was the chief of police. I called out the National Guard, I called out the state police, I set up a unified command structure, and I said, I want you to arrest people that violate the law. That night they went out, they arrested 70 people, and the violence stopped. That's leadership. Secondly, the next day though, I brought in the young African American protest leaders into my office, and I said, because they were peaceful, I said, what are you concerned about? Which I knew. But they wanted to have better police training. They wanted to have a database in which if somebody's fired for excessive force in one jurisdiction, they're not hired somebody else. I said, would you serve on a task force? And they jumped at the opportunity. I said, one condition, you've got to serve with the chiefs of police and sheriffs. They said, we'll do it. They made recommendations for the things that they wanted, but also to increase the pay for law enforcement. We got $5,000 bonuses for every certified law enforcement in the state of Arkansas as a result of what came out of the protest. And so that's how I bring people together. If you talk to any Democrat in Arkansas, they know my door was open to them. And when we could work together, we did.
I want to ask you about something along the lines of law enforcement. And that's when you were head of the DEA from 2001 to 2003. Do I have that correct?
That is correct.
Mm-hmm. And according to the U.S. Government Accountability Office, since the war on drugs began, there's been more than $1 trillion that's spent. You can find polls saying that a lot of Americans still think that the nation has a very serious or even extremely serious drug problem. And of course now we're seeing mass deaths from fentanyl. In 2022 it was about 70,000. Do you think the U.S. needs to seriously rethink its approach in the war on drugs to more treatment as opposed to these enforcement policies?
Yes, and I hope we have already. During that time frame, you can look at the record, and I promoted drug treatment courts. I was the first real law enforcement leader that led an enforcement team that advocated for increased treatment and investment in that, because I recognize exactly what you said. And we've moved away from the terminology war on drugs. It's not any different than mental health. Mental health is not an issue that you solve in one generation as we fixed it. Well, substance abuse is the same. Every generation got to face it. So, sure, we spend a lot of money, but we're going to continue to spend money in the future because we have to invest in treatment. But it's always the supply as well. And I do believe in navigating, going after the cartels in Mexico, as I have done as head of the DEA, making sure that we reduce that supply coming in.
Do you think with some of the lower level drug sorts of crimes, the nonviolent ones, do you think how maybe the laws regarding those are enforced need to be rethought in any respect?
Sure. Like I've been an advocate of the Equal Act, which started out, we had 100-to-1 disparity in the sentencing of crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. Crack cocaine, of course, is used more by minority groups, so they got an increased penalty, even though the quantity was less. And so they triggered very quickly mandatory minimums. It was an unfairness. As head of the DEA, I testified against it. We reduced it. It took us 10 years. We reduced it to 21 disparity, from 100-to-1 to 20-to-1. And now they're advocating to get it down 1-to-1, and I testified for Congress in support of that. So that's just one illustration. We always have to look at our enforcement policy, the fairness of our system. In terms of the legalization movement, in Arkansas we have medical marijuana, but this last year there was a ballot initiative to authorize recreational use of marijuana. And I opposed it, I campaigned against it, and it was defeated. Leadership makes a difference. And we don't send recreational users of marijuana to prison. We don't, small quantities don't wind up there. Those are enforcement policies that we need to make sure we're trying to push treatment and education. But I'm not for decriminalization. It makes a difference as to whether a drug is called legal or illegal and whether there's a consequence or not. And so that's why I would be opposed to a legalization effort.
Day one of a Hutchinson presidency, what are you trying to tackle?
Everything that I've talked about. I would first put in a hiring freeze so that we can reduce the federal non-defense workforce by 10%, which is 200,000 workers. I did that in Arkansas, and we reduced state government employment by 3,000, which is a 14% reduction. So that's day one. Set up my commission on Social Security, Medicaid. I would propose a border security bill with Congress to get the resources that are needed and to reform our asylum laws. I would open up our federal lands for energy production that has been taken off the table by this administration. And I think we need to produce energy. I will be focused on that. I'll probably call in the Federal Reserve chairman and say we got to get interest rates down. And I happen to believe, even though he's independent, I can express my views as president just like anybody else can, and work to keep this get this economy moving.
I wanted to just briefly circle back to the polls and the caucuses. The polling numbers are usually expressed as likely Republican caucus goers say that. So it seems to me that if a candidate were to convince a lot of independents in Iowa to briefly switch party affiliation and show up to a Republican caucus and caucus for a candidate, that could upend those polling numbers. What would be your pitch to the independent population, assuming that they would be able to do that?
Well, the independent voters are not pro-Trump voters, so that's an easy pitch to them to make it clear that I'm the candidate, can take us a different direction, and that independent voters are not partisan aligned as much as wanting to see the country work and get things done. And so that's the case I can make with my record in Arkansas as governor, with my experience. So all of that appeals to independents. But it's also a tone, it's a temperament, and I've proven in Arkansas, I won my last election with 65% of the vote. You don't get that even in a red state without bringing in independents and Democrats. My poll numbers were high in popularity, largely because the Democrats helped on that side of the equation. So that is an important part of it, and I can bring that appeal to independents. The challenge is identifying who they are and getting the message out to them. That's my particular challenge. That's why I'm making sure I do 30 cities in the next 12 days.
I can't wrap this up without asking you a quintessential Iowa question. Have you had some kind of pork tenderloin since you've been in the state, and what's the best that you've had?
I have. Of course, I had it at the Iowa State Fair, but I've had it at restaurants. And, I'm one of these that like it, fried in the skillet, a little bit more thin pork chop. And that's what I grew up with, and I love that.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for stopping here.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
You have the distinction of being the first presidential candidate to be in this building.
We had to go to our last one, so
Yeah.
All right, so tell me, are y'all going to do an editorial endorsement?
We will.
We will.
I sort of thought that might be the case. So, by the way, I'm asking for it, so I hope that you'll consider me on it, and I hope I can earn it. And then is this going to be put online?
Yeah.
This will be online
Yeah,
then, and anybody can see all, we're not editing it so that they can hear everything that you said.
Yep. The videos are rolling out first, and then when we get closer to time, I'm going to do a big compilation article kind of thing saying what all the candidates we talked to said. So
Good.